Hi, my name is Colin Sandberg, coach at the Endurance Collective. I'm here, as always, with Ben Turretts, coach and founder of the Endurance Collective. I know that it's been a while since our last Versus episode. We definitely like to get more of these out, get them out more often, but I do feel very proud of the content that we've created. We've got some really good episodes, and anybody out there who hasn't seen those, go back and watch them. I'm really excited about this one. Although a bit of a warning that we may be touching on some disturbing content today, and it's a subject that I think we have some strong feelings about. It may be the first episode that we require an explicit content warning.
Would that be
although if you're like
warning?
me when I was a kid, that's probably a positive. And we've got a lawyer with us to make sure we don't get in too much trouble. So our guest for this episode, someone we've been looking forward to having on for a while, is Joseph Piscitello, Esquire. I've known Joey for, I think, about 16 years now. He is the founding lawyer of Piscitello Law, based out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, a law firm specializing in cycling law. Piscitello Law has also been the title sponsor for many road and cyclocross races in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Good morning, counselor.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. Glad to join you.
It's a pleasure to meet you.
Same.
So Joey, let's start with this. What got you interested in cycling law, and when did you decide to take your law firm in that direction? I can't imagine that it was purely a financial decision.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I was talking to my wife about that this morning, and we came to this realization that I never really made a decision to do what we almost exclusively do now. It's something that grew organically, just as a result of being a part of the cycling community. So you were mentioning we've known each other. I was thinking it was closer to 20 years, whenever.
It could be.
Yeah. As you both know, one of the really cool things about cycling is the tight-knit community that exists. And my representing cyclists was really just a function of being a part of that community. The more intertwined I became with the community, the more interactions I had with that community, the more that community looked toward me for guidance in the law, just knowing I'm an attorney. After a number of years, and this is dating back, well over a decade, I started to realize a bit of a trend that all of my new clients were cyclists or referred by cyclists. I was always in the field of personal injury, representing people that have been injured in crashes, motor vehicle. But with the cycling community, those car crashes sort of disappeared a bit from my practice, and they were predominantly bike crashes. And, fast forward today, 10, 15 years later, I realized that this is all I do because I'm just connected to the community.
Yeah, that's great.
So it really, I got real lucky, doing the ultimate and merging my vocation with my avocation.
Yeah, well, we're lucky too. So unfortunately, anyone who rides a bike on the roads has witnessed probably both intentional violence and unintentional careless driving. For the purpose of this discussion, I'd like to talk about those individually. For the intentional violence side, I'll just give you a few examples of things that have happened to me personally. I've had drivers push me off the road or try to push me off the road with their car. I've had them brake check me, meaning they get in front of me and slam on their brakes. I've had people throw batteries, rocks, trash, lit cigarettes. I had someone once reach out and grab my neck and try to strangle me. I've had drivers pull guns on me and swing baseball bats and tire irons at me.
Man,
Ben, do you have anything to add on your side?
I've been on a ride where a cyclist pulled a gun on a driver, which was pretty interesting. I've had, beer cans, the battery thing. I don't know why that's a trend. It seems like you're wasting good batteries. Swipes seem to be the most common thing that have happened to me. And then, also people just driving past and the classic, yelling single file at you and then slamming on the brakes, getting out of their car and having an altercation. And I feel like right now, because for some reason, what's in the water, it just seems like in the last 3 years, that's become more and more common when I'm riding on the road. There's a lot more animosity towards cyclists.
Yeah.
So, Joe,
Yeah. Unfortunately, I've experienced the same thing with my riding, and unfortunately, I've had to represent people that had been attacked on their bike, and it makes sense. It makes sense that there's so many conflicts. You have such a differential in speed, and this is part of the problem. And we'll get into it, I'm sure, is the infrastructure that we exist within in the United States. Not all streets are friendly for cyclists, and until our culture shifts a little bit and realizes that if you have cyclists in close proximity with nothing barricading them from vehicles, if they're in close proximity and you have vehicles traveling by, at greater than 20 miles per hour than what you're traveling, there is going to be conflict, both accidental and on purpose, because it's my experience in every one of the conflicts that I've been involved in with clients. There's a perception by motorists that we're getting in their way. What the hell are we doing on the road? We're impeding their progress. Everybody wants to get from point A to point B as fast as they can, and cyclists just get in their way, and they believe that that's unfair. And there's this tension. It's not that they don't like cyclists, right? Just because they're riding a bike, that's how they think. We're impeding their way. And multiple people I've represented where it starts out as the motorists yelling at them. There's some sort of confrontation. And we've had multiple instances where motorists went down the road, waited for the cyclist to come by and then attack them.
Yeah, and that's something that I find it doesn't make sense. If you feel somebody's in your way and holding you up, why would you take more time out of why would you then wait down the road? I think there's something else there besides just, feeling like you're being held up. I feel like so often I have cars passing very close when there's no one else even on the road. You're not holding anybody up. They just don't seem to like the fact that you're there. Maybe they have some sort of beef with cyclists in general. And I guess to me, it seems like there's some sort of bullying aspect. I don't think most of these people would just walk up to somebody on an elevator and get in their face, or somebody walking down the street and do these things. And I know people get road rage all the time and get mad at other drivers, sometimes doing some crazy things in those situations. But I guess, my question is this, and it's probably as much a psychological question as it is a legal question, but is there something about the power imbalance that seems to bring out these bullying behaviors?
There is a correlation between trucks having alterations with cyclists, pickup trucks. There's like a high correlation. But that aside, if you're riding your bike and there's plenty of room for a car to pass, and they buzz you or they abuse you as they go by, I do sincerely believe that it's a function of interactions they've had with other cyclists where they've obstructed their progress. I mean, it doesn't make sense that you would just dislike somebody. Obviously, you're doing something that they don't like. It's not a well thought out process. It's not logical. If somebody wants to get from point A to point B quickly, it is not logical that they would take the time of interacting with you and harassing you. But this is not a well thought out plan. This is not thought process that we should be proud of. Look, the point is, especially in cities, if you speak to people, oftentimes, I'm at a party or I'm at a social function and we start talking and non-cyclists will start speaking about cyclists, not knowing who I am. And there will be this conversation with, the topic is cyclists don't follow the rules of the road. Cyclists run lights. Cyclists ride where they're not supposed to. There are all these bad experiences that people tell about cyclists and then lump us all into this category that we're the bad people.
Yeah.
That has absolutely been an experience that I've had both at social functions and even here in our office, which is littered with, cycling jerseys on the walls and the classic, people riding too wide on the road. And we used to actually, when I was coaching the Duke University team, we would ride with a laminated card that had the North Carolina DOT regulations on cycling on it, about, riding two abreast and impeding traffic and all of that. And I would just try not to engage people and just be like, here's the law. You can read it for yourself. I can't say that didn't escalate situations a couple of times, but there were a couple of moments where somebody looked at it and just kind of walked away. And that was the end of the altercation. I personally find it hard to not elevate that. But I have found that when I just don't engage, the outcome is usually more positive.
Yeah. But I mean, I don't think anybody is without prejudice, but I've seen a lot of sketchy, dangerous driving, but I don't assume that everyone driving a car is irresponsible. And I certainly don't go out of my way to try to commit violence against drivers just because I once saw a car run a red light or speed or make an illegal pass.
Well, that's because, this underscores the distinction between the two groups, car versus car. It's just something we see. There's some idiots out there, that are driving, in a crazy manner. But when you're a vehicle, when you're just driving a vehicle and they're cyclists, it's hard not to start associating any crazy behavior you see with a cyclist as behavior of a cyclist. It's just that group. They're different than us and they point the finger at us. I mean, look, it like 100% of the time, people that have gripes about cyclists, they're bitching about us getting in their way.
Yeah.
This is what but it's not, once again, it's not a logical thought process. I mean, I've seen like really wonderful visual diagrams that show a number of bikes where cars just have to maybe slow down a little bit to go around. And if we turned, like on the major streets that we have in Philadelphia, there's streets that have bike lanes. If you would turn those several hundred bikes every few hours into cars, what would the traffic be like on those roads, right? But a motorist is not going to logically think, oh, wait a second, I do have to slow down a bit. But if those 60 bikes that I pass to get across the city were all cars in front of me, I'd be going, a heck of a lot slower.
Yeah.
If there's rational thought involved, you would see that. But it's not a thought. It's just not a thought process that enters the minds of most motorists.
Yeah, perhaps we're making a mistake trying to rationalize it at all.
Why do you think that irrationality enters the fray so quickly? Because it seems to me kind of lumped in with the whole like if I have a gun in my home, I feel safer, but statistically speaking, I'm more likely to get killed by my own
Right.
gun than I am to, prevent somebody from robbing my house. What brings that irrationality into the equation?
Just people reacting. But look, the point is, and I'm going to ask you both an engineering question. Now, this is really, I think, fundamental to bike crashes.
Mm-hmm.
So, Colin, you have a background in engineering, don't you?
Supposedly.
Okay.
We tested it yesterday.
Yeah. This is a basic concept in my education as an attorney when dealing with the world of what we call products liability. If there's a lawsuit that's being brought against a manufacturer of a product, and if the people we represent believe this product is dangerous and it exposes people to a risk that otherwise should not be exposed to, we call this a defective design, right? We argue that the design of the product is defective. Now, a fundamental concept for engineers that are designing products that are potentially dangerous, and there's a parallel to cycling, is that when you're designing a product and you recognize a risk, you have to design out the risk if possible. You have to take the risk away from the product. But many products you can't, and I'll give you an example, many products you can't take the actual risk away. Like if it's a table saw, like an industrial table saw, how could you design out the risk of cutting off a finger if you have to use the blade to cut through the wood? So,
well, you can't eliminate it, but yeah, you could put a cover over it. You can put a safety switch.
Exactly. If you can't design out the danger, you guard the danger.
Right.
And you put a guard. So you separate the human who's going to be fallible and make mistakes. You separate their fingers from the dangerous object, because as long as there's an unguarded object, a finger's going to go into it and people are going to lose limbs, right? So you put in this guard because you recognize as long as you have a really fast moving blade and you have a slow moving finger next to it, invariably things are going to happen, right? So you put the guard in. As long as we as a society don't recognize that a roadway is like a dangerous object and you have to design out the risk, if we recognize that as long as you have cyclists that are operating their bikes in close proximity with nothing separating them, there's going to be conflict, both intentional and by way of negligence, right? And that speaks to the necessity of changing the infrastructure by designing out that risk, just like a product where you have a separated bike lane. There should be a place so that cars don't brush up against, going 30, 40 miles an hour faster, or a lot of people are going to lose fingers, right? And this is why you have to have delineators so that you're separating the cyclists from the motorists, and thereby reducing, that antagonism invariably that occurs because motorists think you're slowing them down, right?
Right.
So we have to it's impossible to psychologically say, what's the problem? Can't we explain this to people so that they don't get mad at us as cyclists? It's not gonna work. You have to really think at a first principles basis. You have to start thinking differently about how we're going to interact with vehicles. We need to separate them, right? We need to design out the risk, and then we don't have to deal with that person.
Yeah. And I guess I do want to talk about infrastructure versus personal responsibility in a little bit.
Yeah.
But before that, let me just get back to the unintentional side of things, because I would argue that statistically that's even more dangerous. I've always said that, at least the guy who's trying to kill you you know they see you and it's more the people who are distracted, impaired, or just careless that you have to worry about. And specifically, I'm talking about cars turning in front of you, otherwise known as hooking,
Right.
opening the door in front of you, which is called dooring, or what I would say is most common, we've talked about already, the close pass. And statistically, I don't have the exact statistics, but what I would tell you anecdotally is that in a given week of riding, I would probably say, I'd probably have 20 vehicles that pass both too close and too fast at a presumably lethal speed.
Yeah.
Meaning specifically, when I say too close, like less than 3 feet and at a speed that would be either fatal or enough to cause serious harm. As in more than just knocking me off the bike.
Yep.
Joey, I know that you were in Philly, so the mix of things that you see is probably a little bit different. But would you agree that those close passes are probably the biggest, the number one category, the biggest risk for cyclists?
No.
Okay.
No, well, it depends. It depends how how you define the biggest risk for cyclists. If we're, and this is anecdotal also, but this is my anecdotal opinion based on the people that get involved in crashes. So
Okay.
out of those multiple situations that you experience, let's say on a monthly basis, how many crashes do you have on a monthly basis as a result of close calls? Right? Compare that to what I see every day, which is what you were also referencing. It's these right hooks and left hooks. We see this constantly. People making right-hand turns is what results in crashes most often that we see. Granted, people pass, I do have cases where people pass too close and they hit, my clients, and it's dangerous even if they don't hit them. But the number one cause of crashes that we see are, people making a right-hand turn, either the cyclist is to the right and the vehicle just makes a right hook. And also almost as frequently, and this is really scary, the left hook where a vehicle coming in the opposite direction
Right.
just turns in front of you and just, you're waffled.
Maybe they don't realize how fast you're going.
That's a whole conversation. There's a psychological phenomenon that we see that takes place where people making left-hand turns clearly could see, and there's nothing obstructing their view, turn, and they say, "I never saw you." And that's because we're conditioned before we take a left-hand turn to check and see if any cars are coming. If you don't look for a bike, you won't see a bike. And I've never had a case where somebody purposefully turned left into a bike. Maybe 1 out of 100 times they say, "I didn't realize you were going that fast." But
Right.
typically they came out of the car says you came out of nowhere.
Visibility.
I don't know. Yeah, they just never saw you.
Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, that's an issue with motorcycles as well, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How much of this do you attribute to people being distracted by devices and not just driving?
Yeah. Well, it's really, I know that distracted drivers are like a number one cause of crashes. It's really, I can't really say that people making right-hand turns are on their phone or distracted. I really don't know that. It's hard to prove. But I do know that it's an immense problem. People just not paying attention. Obviously, if they're making a right-hand turn, but it's really a function of them just not, if you're making a right-hand turn and there's cars behind you, there's no way the cars behind you are going to get in your way. You just come to a stoplight or a stop sign, you make a right-hand turn, right? You might really look if there's like a crosswalk and you see, you might kind of like slow down and look for pedestrians because we're conditioned to do that. But more and more cyclists on the road, people just aren't looking.
Okay. So Ben, I'd like to get back to you for just a second because I know that you primarily ride mountain bikes and gravel now. And I believe you've told me before that if you do ride on the road, you try to ride with a group. Is that, and I don't think you're the only one, but that's primarily because of the danger you feel about going out onto the road?
Yeah, I mean, I raced on the road for years and years, and still love riding a road bike. But I would say after the first year of COVID, I have and this is totally anecdotal, I have noticed an increase in close passes and animosity towards cyclists on the road. And funny, the only time that I kind of feel safe riding alone on the road is if I'm wearing my Team USA coaching kit that just says USA across it, or I have this the EC kit we did where we donated money to the Marine Corps, and it's all camoed up and super low visibility, but
But respect people.
Yeah,
Interesting.
exactly.
Interesting.
Those two times I don't get issues. We used to get some funny issues when I'd wear Duke clothing and ride in the Chapel Hill area. You'd get a F Duke kind of interaction.
Those
Which,
UNC fans.
Lovable. But yeah, no, absolutely. I am hesitant to ride alone on long road rides by myself now. And I think you and I would agree, and maybe you too, Joey, as longtime experienced cyclists, you do develop like a sixth sense. And I feel like if anyone's going to spot a crash coming, it's going to be somebody like us, and we are almost expecting it at all times. Whereas there's a lot of new cyclists out there who are not expecting this and don't know how to behave. Colin and I have both ridden in race caravans before, with cars going past us.
Yeah,
practically
in every
direction touching us. And we've been in the cars that have been passing the cyclists. So we know how to behave around cars and cars at speed. I don't particularly mind a car passing me very close if it's at a suitable speed. But gosh, I feel my heart goes out to those new cyclists out there who are just loving riding a bicycle, and then somebody hooks them at an intersection or passes too close, and their reaction is to turn back and they swerve into the car. There is a level of experience we've gained from racing that protects us. I'd like to think protects us a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But these new cyclists are just, like sitting ducks.
Yeah. So, Ben, you mentioned the pandemic, and I wanted to mention, I read a story recently about how things have gotten worse during the pandemic. I believe that in 2021, there were 43,000 roadway deaths, the highest since 2005. There were 7,300 pedestrian deaths last year, which was the highest since 1975. And there were almost 1,000 cyclist deaths, which was a 5% increase over the previous year. And the theory was that because there were fewer cars on the road during the pandemic, that a lot of the roads became raceways. And or to look at it from the other way, that when we have traffic, then there's more traffic, it slows things down, and counterintuitively, maybe in some ways makes things safer. And I would say, when I lived in Philly, there were probably a higher number of incidents I had, and like near misses, than I have experienced here in North Carolina. But here in North Carolina, I feel like even though there's less traffic where we are, there's maybe a higher percentage of incidents or near misses that would presumably be fatal.
Yeah, I'd feel, I come from upstate New York, so the two times I was hit by a motor vehicle were both in upstate New York in a rural town. And it was, one of them was actually malicious and one was not. But I would agree with you 100%, Colin. People are going fast, and I feel like they're going faster right now and seem to be more in a hurry to get somewhere that they don't need to be.
Yeah, this is an experience that I've heard of also since the pandemic. Roads being less congested, higher speeds. It's once again, which is why, and we could talk about it, which is why we need to start guarding against that risk and separate the cars from us. Yeah. But there's definitely an uptick since the pandemic, and I've heard psychological reasons too, that people are more aggressive, they're cooped up, they're just wanting to get out and get someplace, and regardless, the statistics do bear out that there's been an uptick in deaths and injuries.
We need a behavioral psychologist guest next time.
Right.
All right. So I want to tell a quick story here. It's not a very happy story. On July 10th, a 40-year-old man named Matthew Simpson was riding along the Ellerby Creek bike path here in Durham with his son behind him. He was crossing Guess Road. Ben, this is an intersection you know very well because it's just a few blocks away from the Endurance Collective office.
Yep.
So Matthew Simpson hit the button to trigger the crossing light, waited until the light turned on, and then when it turned on, he went. But he didn't make it across the road because a man named Omari Newsom hit him with his Volkswagen Jetta and continued to drag him under his car while his son behind him watched him be dragged for about a block up the road. Matthew was taken to the hospital where he died of his injuries. And Mr. Newsom continued to drive on, though he was apprehended in Randolph County a few weeks later. And he's now facing felony hit and run, felony conspiracy, and felony death by motor vehicle charges. Now, Joey, I'm not asking for you to comment on any of the specifics of this case. I bring it up mainly to put a human face on some of these tragedies, but I guess I do have a couple of questions. First, how common is it for drivers to flee the scene after an incident? And if they do that, how much worse do they make it on themselves?
Yeah, good question. Unfortunately, I have had the unfortunate experience of representing the estates of people that have been killed by motorists that not only fled the scene, this is a tough one, fled the scene and got away with it. And it's heartbreaking. It obviously doesn't happen a lot. Motorists don't typically do this, but it does happen. And when somebody is caught, what you have to do is it helps to make the distinction between, there's separate areas of the law, as I'm sure you both know. One is a criminal judicial system, and one is a civil judicial system. And if you're doing something that implicates criminal behavior, there's a whole different area of the law that involves prosecutors or district attorneys who will prosecute you and find you, responsible for a criminal act. In the civil world, what we're really talking about is negligence, and whether somebody leaves the scene or not, either they were negligent or they weren't negligent. And if it ever does go to trial, let's put it this way. If you hit somebody and hurt them badly and you stop and you call an ambulance and do everything you can to help that person is perceived a particular way when a jury is coming up with an award to compensate. They're compensating the person, not punishing the person that did it. Whereas if you're the person that hit the person and then took off, you're going to get punished. You're going to get punished. So there would be a big distinction in the amount of money that would be
Right.
awarded in a case like that. Not that that's going to make a difference to someone that's been killed, but obviously you make things a lot worse by fleeing the scene. And you start implicating, and you're pushing yourself into the criminal world at that point. So
Right.
a really dumb move, but like most acts where there's a conflict with the cyclist, it's not a well thought out thought process that evolves in the person's mind who takes off, or the person that purposefully tries to hit us. It's an illogical, stupid reaction.
Right. So now on that intersection of Guest Road and the Ellerby Creek Trail, there is a ghost bike, which for anybody who doesn't know is a white bike that they put up to memorialize cyclist victims of car violence. And every time I ride or drive past there, I think about Matthew and I think about his son. But there is another aspect to this that I did want to mention, because I also noticed there's a light overhead that signals to cars to stop when there's a cyclist crossing on the trail. And honestly, it is hard to see. And I hope that nobody thinks that I'm trying to excuse this specific driver, because obviously there's no excuse, hit and run. But that red light is hard to see. And this sort of gets back into the infrastructure issues. So, I'd like to hear your thoughts about how much of the problem is individual drivers and who are either angry or violent, impaired or distracted, and how much of it is infrastructure or poor driver training, or problems with the laws themselves.
Right. Well, I think it depends on what the question is that you're asking. If the individual asking the question is saying, what can we do to help minimize crashes, people being injured, people being killed, I think we have to think about it like an engineer. We have to try to grasp the low-hanging fruit and do what we can to eliminate as many crashes as possible. I think it's going to take, a period of time for people in the United States to think differently about the benefits of being a cyclist and how cycling helps our community, how it helps in many different ways. That's going to be a slow, long process. That's a cultural change that we can't just, there's no silver bullet for that.
Right.
But if we think like engineers, we have to ask ourselves, and then you're raising an engineering question. We have to start thinking about what can we do, knowing that people either on purpose or as a matter of just being distracted, what can we do to eliminate some of these problems? And, once again, we're getting into the infrastructure. If we really want to save lives, we have to think about infrastructure.
Joey, do you think there's any kind of legal solution to, in that, it seems that there isn't a whole lot of punishment, might be the wrong word, but drivers typically seem to get away with negligence or animosity towards cyclists more often than they are punished for, doing something horrible to somebody who, doesn't have a 2,000-pound roll cage strapped to them.
Yeah.
It seems like that would have to come from a legislative body, but
I think the issue that you're raising is if penalties were more severe, right?
If people took it more seriously, and maybe it has to go all the way to driving school, is like, if you hit a cyclist because you are not paying attention, this is what can happen to you. Just like DWIs became, in the 70s, DWIs were a sport, and now, if you get a DWI, you're in some trouble.
Right. Yeah, I think when when you speak to anybody that's a family member of a victim of a crash, they have very, very strong opinions about the lack of penalties to individuals that have killed family members of theirs and are out driving and they're not punished. It's a really strong visceral reaction that people have. But philosophically, I think the issue that you're raising is whether or not penalties impact on behavior, right? And from a legal perspective, the reason that we incarcerate people is like threefold. If somebody does something really bad, we want to take them out of society and actually physically preclude them from interacting with society. Another aspect of locking people up and giving them that ultimate penalty, or one of the ultimate penalties, is to rehabilitate them and educate them and have them think about the behavior that led to being incarcerated. So you have, that's two, right? You have like precluding them from being next to people, you have rehabilitating them, and another one is to punish them, right? You're getting punished, this hurts. And there have been, it's been questionable, it's been questioned whether or not any of those aspects of the penal system have worked, right? Everybody knows that if you kill somebody on purpose, you're going to go to jail for first-degree murder. But now ask yourself, how many first-degree murders did not come about because the person said, oh, gee willikers, I'm going to end up in prison, right?
Yeah. Right.
We don't think logically at the point in time when we're killing people.
Right.
And I don't know that we think, and this is controversial, and I know, people aren't going to like this position. I don't know if the penalty is the aspect that's going to change the number of people that die.
Do you think that maybe going back to when you get a license, so the education about, maybe it's not, jail time, but it's something like, if you drink and drive or you abuse substances, you will lose your license, which can have this like cascading effect across your life. And, I would say, I definitely think about, if I'm going to have 4 beers, maybe I should take an Uber home, because if I get pulled over, it's a problem. If I clip a pedestrian in a crosswalk, it's not worth me trying, I guess I see both sides of that. And maybe are we doing ourselves a disservice as a society? We've got the engineering aspect, but do we care about the educational aspect as well, in terms of cyclists are part of our transportation infrastructure? I can't remember hearing about cycling or any type of pedestrian traffic other than other motorists when I went to get my license and took my driver's ed and all of that stuff.
But it's different now.
Okay.
It's actually different now. It's pretty cool. At least in Pennsylvania, when you learn to drive, they teach you the Dutch reach.
Okay.
Do both of you know what the Dutch reach is?
I don't, but it sounds very
now imagine this. Look how many, we have a lot of years of cycling amongst us, right?
Right.
If you speak to someone that's learning to drive, they know what the Dutch reach is. And the Dutch reach is something that everybody should know about that's a driver. When you drive a vehicle and you park it, you're taught, at least in Pennsylvania, something called the Dutch reach, which means, imagine you're at a steering wheel, you just parked your vehicle along the curb. You're taught to never use your left hand to open the door. Don't ever take your left, you use your right hand. And look at what my thought, you take your right hand, it minimizes you throwing the door open, because first of all, you can't.
Mhm.
And number two, it causes you to look, right? That's the Dutch reach. If people are educated, and they are being educated, our children are being educated right now to use the Dutch reach. Why? Because there are cyclists, more and more cyclists, and we're going to stop people from being doored because our kids hopefully are, education is a big part of it, right? They're becoming sensitive, and it's a cultural change that's occurring.
Okay. I
All,
wasn't aware of that. That's cool.
yeah, so we have to tell people, right, as cyclists, it's a pretty cool thing that Google it. It's something that's taught around the country, and it obviously started over in Europe, but it's something through education. I like to think lives are being saved as a result of education. The Dutch reach.
Cool.
Yeah.
Another reason to move to Amsterdam too.
Yeah. Well, that's one.
I've found that many people, cyclists, drivers, and even the police don't always understand all the laws that pertain to cyclists. And it seems like there's a lot of inconsistency from state to state and even township to township. I think it's really confusing sometimes. For example, some townships make it illegal to ride on the sidewalks, and there's other townships that require cyclists to ride on the sidewalks on certain roads. There are some places that allow cyclists to treat stop signs as yields. As far as passing goes, North Carolina requires 2 feet to pass. I believe PA requires 4 feet. So Joey, I believe you primarily operate in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, right? Mm-hmm. Do you think there's a lot of inconsistency in the laws, and is that a part of the problem, and that factors into the training side of it too?
Well, there are individual differences amongst states, but there's also individual differences within states. So, for instance, in Pennsylvania, I know if somebody calls me and they're involved in a crash and they were riding their bike on the sidewalk, I need to ask myself, oh, wow, did that happen in Philadelphia County or did it happen in Bucks County? Right. Different local ordinances will dictate what happens there. Ultimately, there has to be some personal responsibility of the cyclist, of the motorist, to know the laws of their particular venue. I don't know how many incidents occur because people are familiar with the laws of cycling in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, and then they go to North Carolina and they get involved in a crash because they didn't know the law. I mean, that probably doesn't happen.
Interesting story. I actually got pulled over riding 2 abreast in Biltmore Village, just outside in Asheville, because in the tiny little municipality of Biltmore Village, you are not allowed to ride 2 abreast.
Yeah.
And
interesting.
So I actually had a motorist pass me oncoming, pulled into the police station to tell the officer that we were riding 2 abreast. Officer came out and pulled us over.
I've never heard of that. That's amazing.
That's true on the whole Blue Ridge Parkway too, I believe.
I didn't know. Found out. He was actually almost apologetic that he had to pull us over.
How about that? And that's very interesting.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, I want to throw out a statistic here. The U.S. ranks 47th out of 54 in traffic fatality rate among high-income nations. I guess that's the new way of saying first world countries, according to the WHO.
47th, as in like at the top is better. 47th.
First would be the best, the least traffic fatalities.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
We suck.
So we're not doing too well. What is it about America that makes it so bad in this respect? I can't imagine it's just we're angrier, maybe, hormones in the Big Macs. Maybe it just completely goes back to the infrastructure.
And is this a statistics concerning cyclists or pedestrians and cyclists?
This is overall traffic fatalities.
Oh, traffic fatalities. Okay. Bigger roads, bigger cars, different people, speed.
Right.
I did read a little bit about how cars have gotten significantly bigger in the last few years, to the point where, the elevated position of a driver, one, makes it harder to see a cyclist, but two, makes it more likely that a collision is going to be fatal because the cyclist will go under the vehicle. So, I think some of it is on auto manufacturing too, or just what we like to buy as consumers.
Yeah.
Trucks are a big thing here, aren't they?
Yeah. And just SUVs, and kind of, like if you look at a Subaru Outback from 10 years ago compared to a Subaru Outback today, it is a higher vehicle. You're going to hit somebody above the waist as opposed to, much lower on the body. There's less going over the hood and more going under the vehicle.
Well, I think it's interesting in the way we conceptualize things, because a lot of people say that they buy these SUVs or things that they sit up higher in the bigger cars because they feel safer. But the way we think of safety is purely individual. It's my safety inside the car and not the safety of everyone in the system.
Yep.
So anyway,
can we just follow up on that just right now?
Oh, absolutely.
That's a really, this is like a little love of mine in the world of automobiles. What do both of you think? What do both of you think is the number one cause of people being hit, pedestrians or cyclists?
Number one cause?
Yeah. What's the number one cause?
Distraction.
Right. Distraction. I mean, would you? I mean, we could all agree that it's not volitional.
Right. Yeah.
Right. It's distraction. Okay.
Right.
So, what is our world going to look like? Have you thought about this with the advent of autonomous vehicles?
I've thought about it quite a bit, actually, and I'm really excited for this, because I think, within 10 years, self-driving features will be a standard feature like cruise control is now on new cars. And I trust a self-driving, I know they're far from perfect, but I certainly trust self-driving cars, even at their current level of technology, which is only getting better every day, way more than I trust humans. So I'm really excited about this as a cyclist, but also I think it could totally reshape cities. If we think about parking, there's really, if you have the standard is self-driving cars, you have no need for parking spots, and there's so many great things we can do with all those parking spots. Having green spaces in cities, and having bike lanes.
And having less vehicles. The average vehicle is only used, a fraction of hours of the time, and then it sits there. Hence the need for parking lots. Things. As a Tesla owner for the last 7 years, who is fortunate, myself is fortunate enough not only to have
an Elon super fan.
Yes, but as someone who has studied it constantly, autonomous driving, and I'm fortunate enough to have not only the vehicle being autonomous, but I'm a beta tester for full autonomy that is different than what the average, what they call autopilot on a vehicle. You cannot imagine that. You could, by what you were saying, you could imagine it, Colin, but the amount of safety and the lack of inattentiveness that occurs when you are on full autonomy is just absolutely off the charts and impressive when you look at what it was 4 years ago, 3 years ago, versus what it is now, and how it's improved and how it improves. We get updates every few days. We get downloads and installations of improvements with the full autonomy. But the point is, this is not a pitch, for Tesla. But the point is, things are going to change drastically. They're going to change so drastically. There's going to be unintended consequences with full autonomy. Our society relies upon motor vehicle crashes in order to save lives by getting human organs to transplant into people. There is going to be a cessation
Wow.
of organs available because crashes are what is used to harvest organs to save people. There's going to be a shortage of organs because you're just not going to have those crashes with autonomous vehicles. And we're not going to have the crashes with cyclists either.
Yeah,
It's just not going to occur.
Crazy. And God, I mean, I almost feel like I'd love to do a whole nother episode just on this because it's such an interesting topic to me. There's so many things that nobody's thought of. I know there's lots of theories about this, but I think for the most part, they're positive changes. Let's just hope we all live long enough to take advantage of them.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So there is a saying, I'm sure you guys have both heard say, that you never read the comments, meaning when you're reading any kind of news story, pretty much the comments sections are where you see the most offensive, ignorant, and trollish things. I feel like I'm conscious of that most acutely when reading any story about cycling crash. And even on something like the Matthew Simpson story that I was talking about earlier, I was really conscious of that and saying, like, don't scroll down, because if I saw any of those comments, I would just be so enraged. Because even in cases where it's totally clear that the cyclist bears no fault, there are people who feel the need to comment about how cyclists are dangerous, and maybe they once saw a cyclist run a red light, so they deserve to die. So I guess my question, and I guess we talked about a little bit of this earlier, but do cyclists themselves bear any responsibility for the violence committed against them? Or in other words, do you think the victims were asking for it, perhaps because they were wearing skimpy clothes?
Yeah. Well, yeah, we don't like to, victim blaming is not the road we want to go down, but I like to consider myself an ambassador of cycling. So when I ride my bike down the road, I try to do nice things for motorists. I have the right of way oftentimes, but I try consciously to be polite and cut cars a break and let them go. And if you try it, it's amazing the look you get. You could see it's like they're having an epiphany when they see a cyclist doing a good thing for them and allowing them to go, even though they were making a mistake. They're about to make a right-hand turn. So instead of me just proceeding, stopping and, say, go ahead. So I try to, try to spread a good look for cyclists and be a good ambassador. And there are people that never do that, and people that try to enforce their rights and contest the right of way with cars because they know they have the right of way. It's a silly thing. It's a silly thing to do because it enrages the cars. And if there is contact, you're going to lose. It never pays to make a point that you have the right of way when a car is going to run, into you. It's not the right thing to do. So I think sometimes we should all, as cyclists, ask ourselves, is there anything I could do today during my ride in which I'm going to cause a motorist to go home and say, hey, you wouldn't believe what happened today.
Yeah.
That guy was not a jerk.
Well, this brings up an interesting debate that I've heard. I've heard a lot of cyclists talking about the need to take the lane. And personally, I pretty much always try to ride as far to the right as I safely can. And then when I have to move out to avoid something, I try to look back and make sure that it's safe to do that. But that does mean that there's probably more likelihood that cars will pass me when it really isn't safe to pass. And on the other side, I know people who, always ride in the middle of the lane to enforce their right of way, and I don't feel very safe personally doing that. And I'm just not sure if that's the best way to go. I'm not trying to be too critical of that. Maybe that is the right way to go. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think we have to ask ourselves in that instance, when we are taking the lane, are we doing it because it actually is safer and you should take the lane, as opposed to, you know, having a car try to sneak around you and crash into you? Are we doing it to be safer? Then we should do it, even if the ultimate impact of that is you're gonna piss off the car, right? So when we do that, when we do take the lane, there's a trade-off. We're trading off not being a good ambassador. We're making the car upset that we're taking the lane, but that's okay because we're balancing our own safety. So in that instance, you know, it's good to not be a good ambassador sometimes, like when your life's on the line.
Yeah.
But when you're just riding out there to enforce your right to ride out there, you're not any safer and you're not being a good ambassador. So I would argue that it's wrong to just take the lane all the time.
Right. Depends. I suppose the reason I don't do that is because I don't feel a high level of confidence that a car is not just going to run me over if I'm right there.
Yep.
So I started using a cyclic camera on every ride this year. I have a front camera right now, and hopefully I'll be getting a rear camera soon. Wink, wink, Santa. Basically, the cyclic camera is basically an action camera, but they're small and light, and you can download the videos right after you ride. But if you don't do that, they'll just erase and record the next video next time you use it. So they can also be used as front and rear lights. By the way, cyclic is they have some good Black Friday sales if anyone's interested. And this podcast is not sponsored by Cyclic. We would welcome that sponsorship. Anyway, I started using the Fly 12, which is their front camera, because I'm very worried about that a car is going to hit me and then flee the scene, specifically, or even if they don't, that they're going to say something like, he swerved in front of me and came out of nowhere. And honestly, I don't have a high degree of confidence that the police are going to side with me if it's their word against mine. Yeah. So from a legal standpoint, how important is it for cyclists to ride with a camera, and how much difference does that make in some of the cases that you've seen?
Yeah. So in certain, you know, there's no blanket answer to that. I have cases which if I had a camera, it would prove the case 100%. Right. In most cases, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. So the most common crash that we see, right, is this right hook or the left hook.
Yeah.
Every one of those cases, I do not need a camera to prove my case. As soon as it's established that the vehicle was taking a right-hand turn and I was on the right side, I don't need a camera to prove that, right? The only time I need a camera is in the cases that I have where, like right now, I have a case that the insurance company has denied making a payment to this poor woman who was hit from behind by a pickup truck who rubbed up against her and broke off a really heavy-duty mirror. You know, he obviously just clipped her with the mirror in her back and fractured her skull. And she was unconscious. And we just had a deposition in this case literally 2 weeks ago. And the position the insurance company was taking is that my client was riding down the road, but she just was making a U-turn and turned in front of the driver of the pickup truck.
Right.
The driver of the pickup truck, I assumed, was going to say, yes, she just pulled in front of me. To my surprise, we took the deposition of the driver. Now, I wish we had a camera here, but we took the deposition of the driver, and he admitted that he never really saw her pull in front of him. He remembers seeing her on the side of the road to the right of the fog line, and then suddenly she hit his mirror.
She hit him.
Yeah, but he wasn't even blamed. This is the horrible part about it. He wasn't even blaming her. Here, the police officer literally wrote in his report that the cyclist obviously pulled in front, even though there was no witness that ever said that.
Ugh.
Police, and I have other cases where the police officers have testified. Cyclist riding down the road, a car pulls out. The cyclist has the right of way going straight. Car pulls out of a Wawa or a 7-Eleven, right?
Let's make it a Wawa.
Let's make it a Wawa. Hits the
It's not a
cyclist.
sheet.
Yeah.
You know what the police officer testified? Well, the cyclist, of course, has a right to be riding there, but let's face it. There are cars on the road. You're asking for it.
Yeah.
That's what the police officer testified to in a deposition. Right?
So they have no concept of.
It's amazing that you would be in a position like that and have no concept of that, right? But actually this occurs like maybe on a too often basis, but I'm digressing a little bit. My only point is having a camera is helpful only in my cases where the driver kills the client and claims, and I have one of these recently where the driver hit my client from behind, killed him, and claimed my client was just cutting across the street.
Yeah.
And the client, the deceased person, was a real experienced cyclist that would have never just cut across the street. This person came by and just hit them from behind because they didn't see him.
Mm-hmm.
The person that was killed had a app working on their phone with GPS coordinates.
Yeah.
We hired the best engineer we could that had expertise in GPS tracking. Unfortunately, you may know GPS tracking, it'll show your line, but there's a float that they call where it could be, I don't know, 10 to 12 feet lateral. Right. So we couldn't really tell from the GPS. If we had a camera in that, it would be wonderful. So in very few cases, they would help. It's only the ones where there's nobody around to testify. But the great thing, and I didn't know it was like cyclic. Is that how you say it?
I think so.
Yeah, I have.
I guess we better figure this out if we want them.
Anyway, cyclic, I thought it was, but I have them. The best thing about them, I think, is the light. Lights are, I think, lights are more important than the camera aspect of them.
That's interesting.
To have a flashing light to avoid the crash, because the camera is only going to help you if you've been hit and they're telling a complete different story. But believe it or not, most of the crashes we see, they're all telling the same story, and the story is that
yeah,
exactly. And that's why I think the light on the cyclic or whatever it is really a good thing to have. Front and rear.
Yeah.
What at the camera though, one bad thing about, not bad, but just we've experienced sometimes the video comes back to haunt us. As a matter of fact, I won't name him, but one of your athletes, Colin, from way back, I represented, and he was hit in a right hook. The people that the panel that watched this case saw the video, and they initially decided against your ex-athlete because they had footage of him coming up to the intersection, and he was, in their opinion, going way too fast between a space of parked vehicles and the traffic, and he was flying in between them, and then he was hit with the right hook. And the camera, I almost wished it did not exist. I wished he would have just been riding and said, I'm riding down the side of the road and the vehicle took a right-hand turn, as opposed to having video coverage of how dicey it looks dicey sometimes. That's my only point.
Yeah, that's understandable.
Yeah.
So this is kind of a general question, but we talked about cameras. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that cyclists should do to reduce the chance of becoming a victim of traffic violence, or short of just not riding on the road like Ben does?
Yeah, I absolutely, absolutely. And this is ironic, but the person that I was just referencing, your ex-athlete, he was involved in several crashes, and he came to me after the third crash. I know you're trying to figure out who it is. He came to me after the third crash, and he said, "Joe, is it me?" And I hesitated from telling him the truth. I said, "Listen," I said, "I have a suggestion, and this is, I think you can do something. When you go out and ride, especially in the city or anywhere, there's a little game that we play. My son and I do it. The game is, how many near crashes can we count? How many crashes did we avoid by being really vigilant? So we keep score, like, of how many times I could count that a car was going to turn right, but I knew he was going to turn right, and I slowed down or I sped up and I avoided it. Every time it happened, see if you could count how many near misses. And you could even pretend like you're going to get $1,000 for every near miss that you avoid, or near hit that you avoid. And if you just think about this during a ride, like, how many can I spot? Because I have a camera on it, I want to use it in a broadcast to show how crazy cars are. You could actually anticipate and avoid crashes just by looking for them. You know, anticipating, which I think, Ben, you said that you anticipate.
Yeah. I mean, my head is always on a swivel.
Yeah.
And I feel like, I can't explain this, but I can feel when one's coming behind me, like I almost know if this is a car that is going to be a problem, or if it's a car that is just going to pass me by.
I think I've developed what echolocation. I think we turn into like bats, and we could actually, I think I could feel a car coming at me by the engine, by the way it's approaching, by its speed.
Yep.
Right.
And I think that a lot of that does come from riding in the caravan, and knowing when a car is, you can feel and hear when a car accelerates.
Right. You could almost tell when they see you.
Yes.
And they're doing the right thing, right?
Because you hear the change in the pitch of their tires.
Yeah,
there's different things that happen.
Right.
And when a car is within 50 feet of me, I'm like, I might hop off the road on this one.
Right.
I rarely does it happen that a car comes by me either too close or politely, and I don't know that it's coming.
Yep.
There's a movie called Premium Rush, which I know Ben's seen because we have a friend who is actually.
We have a friend who's in it.
Joey, I'm not sure you've
seen,
but it's called Premium Rush. It's a movie. It's starring Joseph Gordon-Levitt. He's a bike messenger in New York City, and I believe at the beginning of the city, there's this scene where he every near miss, he sort of freezes time in his head and calculates if he went this way, he'd end up on the hood of the car. If he went this way, and like out of 5 different scenarios, there's one where he doesn't crash, that he chooses instantaneously to take that path. So anyway,
to avoid, can I just, because I think it's really important, one thing to avoid, this little game I play with how many near crashes can you count on a ride, but also another thing I really encourage people to do is to really get a light, get a flashing rear light in a front one as well. I know it's not a cool thing for racers to do.
It kind of is now.
It's
these days,
right?
it seems pretty standard.
And one of the other things I've heard there's been some studies on is having bright colored shoes is the most effective thing you can have on your body to.
Wow, that's interesting.
they're constantly moving like a flashing light.
Mm.
And that is something that will break up the monotony of, or
Yeah,
break
yeah.
the
The tunnel
visual
vision,
in front
like,
of it.
yeah,
Right. So
Interesting.
if you have brightly colored shoes, that is helpful.
I like it.
So on the other side, if we do find ourselves a victim, or if we're riding with somebody who ends up being a victim of one of these incidents, is there anything we need to do that we haven't talked about yet?
Yeah. Proactively, everyone should think about their car insurance. Your car insurance is what protects you if you're a cyclist. If you're a cyclist and you're hit by a motor vehicle, that is a car-related crash, which implicates your insurance coverage. The most important thing for a cyclist to have, and anybody is welcome to contact us about this, is something called underinsurance and uninsurance.
Right.
That is the part of your policy that protects you. When a client comes into my office, they have a broken bone, they've gone through surgery, there's a good chance that the person that hit them has a $15,000 policy.
Right.
That's all that's available. So every cyclist, and I know
that might not even cover their bike.
Correct. So if you have an underinsurance policy of as much as you could afford, it protects you to the tune of whatever your policy limits are. So all cyclists should have an underinsurance policy.
Right.
Or we call it uninsurance if the person that hits you doesn't have insurance, they're uninsured, or it's a hit and run or a phantom vehicle. So what you should do as a cyclist is take a look at your own insurance policy, ask your agent or go online or ask an attorney, do I have proper underinsurance? Because that's what's going to save you if you're involved in a crash.
That's great advice. Really interesting. A reason to have more than the minimum there. And we all know that in certain areas in particular, I know Philly is one of them. There's quite a few uninsured drivers out there on the roads, unfortunately.
Exactly.
Okay, so we always like to end these episodes with a slightly more fun question or something that's only tangentially related. So bonus question for both of you. I kind of talked about prejudice against cyclists earlier, and is there any kind of car in particular that you feel prejudice against? And like when you see one of these cars and you're just like, oh boy, here comes trouble. And I guess I'll start on this one and say, I apologize to Mustang drivers.
Oh, I'm like, man, you
took freaking Mustang. I'm like, this guy's gonna drive. Like
I would say newer model Mustangs though, because I love a 70s and older Mustang. I think they're beautiful cars.
Yeah.
And conversely, on the other side, I feel like every time I get buzzed by a Prius, I'm like, what the hell? You're driving a Prius. You're supposed to be nice.
I didn't even know they could go fast.
Yeah. Well, they're late to hot yoga or something.
Yeah. For me, this is terrible because, it's a horrible generalization. Audi drivers. Audi drivers.
You have an Audi.
I'm set, but they go faster than other people. I just
see that.
And the case I was telling you about, the driver that hit my cyclist and said he crossed the street, it was an Audi. But I have a hard time with Audi drivers being super aggressive, racing around. I guess there's a lot of Audis that are really fast cars too, right?
And I think there is a reputation of Audi drivers actually like, getting them because they like to drive them. And like to drive them fast, not just for show.
Yeah. And when you go to buy one, usually it's an Audi Porsche dealer. And if you can't afford the Porsche, you get the Audi.
But I feel like there's a lot of money to take from if you do get hit by an Audi. No comment.
I'm not going to comment on that. But funny you say that. I could always tell what kind of policy a person has based on the car that they drive.
Yeah,
my wife drives an Audi, so I'm going to make sure to.
And I bet you have a good policy, right?
I've actually tried to settle with an irate pickup truck driver before by commenting on how much I like his Tacoma and saying that I have a lifted Tacoma too.
They're
and
dangerous.
then diffuse the situation.
You do.
Okay, now that we've alienated ourselves.
Right,
Great,
totally.
great question.
Yeah.
Great
We've
question.
we've covered most groups here, pissing off a lot of people. Okay, so Joey, just to be clear, do you operate just in Pennsylvania and New Jersey?
Actually, the way it works with attorneys is we could represent people in various states. And all we do, well, predominantly Pennsylvania and New Jersey is the people that come to me, but I've represented people in various states, you know, including California. What you do is when you go into court, you just have to have an attorney in California ask the court to admit you. It's called pro hoc vice. And there's a little motion they file and they say, hey,
Okay.
in effect, Joe's a good guy.
Yeah, I thought you had to pass a state bar exam in each state, so that.
No, that's for you to practice there on a day-to-day basis.
Okay.
But if there's a big case in Oklahoma, I could go there. I just associate with an attorney, and that attorney says, you know, he vouches or she vouches for me, and I could represent an individual.
All right. Well, so anybody out there, you can go to the Piscitello Law website at piscitellolaw.com, or Joey, can I give your email address?
Of course.
And
also, and just so people know that one of the great things, if you do call us, is not necessarily that I have to represent you, because I'm connected to the cycling world. I know the attorneys in other states that specialize in cycling that I work with. So I could give you a recommendation also if you just contact us.
Good to know.
Yeah, and the email address is
Great. It's joe@piscitellolaw.com.
Yep.
So Joey, thanks so much for joining us. I think this was really useful and interesting.
We should talk about autonomous vehicles in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a lot of thoughts on this.
Yeah.
So thanks everybody for watching, and please like and subscribe, and send in any additional questions or complaints that you may have. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.